If you look at a nighttime image of Oregon from space, the state splits into two completely different worlds. In the west, from Portland through Salem and down to Eugene, the entire landscape glows with a brilliant chain of light. Cities, suburbs, highways, universities, and tech corridors blend into one continuous ribbon of brightness that feels alive, dense, and unstoppable. It is the Oregon most people imagine: green, busy, and full of opportunity. But the moment you cross the Cascade Mountains, that brightness collapses. The lights thin out, then disappear entirely into a vast sweep of darkness. Eastern Oregon becomes a world of sagebrush plains, open range, volcanic plateaus, and remote towns separated by long, empty highways. Counties larger than some states hold only small pockets of people, and huge regions look almost untouched. It feels as if you have entered a different country, not just a different half of the same state. So why did almost all of Oregon's people crowd into the narrow strip west of the Cascades while the entire East remained so sparsely populated? The answer has almost nothing to do with modern politics or personal preference. Oregon's population divide was shaped by forces far older, including mountains, climate, trade routes, and geography that determined the state's destiny long before any city existed. And if you enjoy deep dive videos that explain why places grow the way they do, feel free to subscribe. A nighttime map shows the truth in one glance. Satellite images of Oregon taken at night reveal the state's population divide with stunning clarity. The western side glows brightly in a continuous band stretching from Portland through Salem and Eugene. The Willamette Valley appears as a sprawling ribbon of light filled with cities, suburbs, highways, and industry. The density is unmistakable. Eastern Oregon, however, appears almost entirely dark. Only a few isolated clusters, such as Bend, Pendleton, and Ontario, break the darkness. Everything between them is black, representing vast landscapes with very few people. The nighttime image visually communicates what statistics and maps already suggest. Western Oregon is heavily populated and economically active, while Eastern Oregon is spacious, quiet, and sparsely settled. This stark contrast is the product of centuries of geography, climate, infrastructure development, and economic opportunity shaping the land. A single snapshot from space is enough to show how dramatically different the two sides of Oregon truly are. Why 80% of Oregonians live west of the Cascades. Most of Oregon's population is concentrated in the narrow and fertile strip of land west of the Cascade Range, and this pattern was established long before modern cities existed. The Willamette Valley, which stretches from Portland to Eugene, offered ideal conditions for settlement thanks to its mild climate, abundant water, rich soils, and access to rivers that connected early towns to coastal trade. As communities grew, this area became the center of governance, commerce, and transportation. West of the Cascades, people could farm easily, travel comfortably, and build stable towns with reliable food sources and infrastructure. East of the mountains, the landscape shifts dramatically into high desert terrain where water is scarce, distances are immense, and the climate is far harsher. While this land covers the majority of Oregon's area, it is far less suited for dense population. The Cascades effectively funneled nearly all long-term growth into the west, creating a permanent imbalance. Today, more than 3/4 of Oregonians continue to live west of the mountains because that region still holds the jobs, universities, ports, and transportation systems that support modern life. Geography made Western Oregon dominant, and that dominance continues today. Oregon's entire population map is shaped by a simple meteorological reality. Moist Pacific air travels inland and collides with the Cascade Mountains. As it rises over the peaks, it cools and releases huge amounts of rainfall onto western Oregon. This rain feeds temperate forests, rivers, farms, and valleys, creating one of the most fertile and habitable regions in the Pacific Northwest. Western Oregon thrives because nature provides the water needed for people, crops, and towns to flourish. Once the air crosses the Cascade Crest, however, almost all of its moisture is gone. The land east of the mountains lies in a deep rain shadow that transforms the environment into dry sagebrush plains, open ranchlands, and high desert ecosystems. Farming becomes difficult without irrigation. forests become sparse, and large settlements struggle to form. This rain line creates two drastically different landscapes within a single state. One side receives abundant water, allowing dense cities to grow. The other side receives very little, creating conditions better suited for ranching, agriculture, and wide open spaces rather than urban development. Oregon's rainfall pattern is the invisible force that split the state into two very different worlds. How the Cascades turned eastern Oregon into a dry backcountry. The Cascade Range is the defining physical barrier that shaped Oregon's population distribution. These towering volcanic peaks form a massive wall from north to south, and they divide the state into two separate environmental zones. West of the Cascades lie river valleys, forests, and gentle terrain that supported settlements, trade routes, and early economic development. Rivers flowing toward the Pacific created natural transportation corridors that encouraged growth. East of the mountains, the land rises sharply into a high plateau with limited water, harsher winters, hotter summers, and far greater distances between viable settlement areas. Historically, the Cascades made travel extremely difficult, isolating the east from the west for long stretches of time. Even today, only a handful of major roads cross the range, and winter storms often close those routes. The environmental challenges of the East discourage dense populations, large urban centers, and industrial growth. Instead, Eastern Oregon developed into a region of ranches, small towns, and resource-based industries scattered across a vast landscape. The presence of the Cascades ensured that Oregon would evolve into a state with two fundamentally different identities, one green and populous, the other dry and sparsely inhabited. Eastern Oregon contains some of the largest counties in the entire United States. Harney County, Malheur County, and Lake County, for example, span enormous areas that exceed the size of several New England states. Yet despite their sheer landmass, these counties have extremely small populations, sometimes only a few thousand residents spread across thousands of square miles. That creates regions where it is entirely possible to drive for an hour or more without encountering a single town or a major service center. Population density in these counties often resembles that of the rural American West, rather than the urbanized Pacific Northwest. Wide open rangelands, high desert plains, and sparse settlements dominate the landscape. The vastness makes it difficult to build large infrastructure networks, schools, hospitals, and businesses close to where people live. This isolation further discourages population growth, reinforcing a cycle in which low density makes services harder to maintain, and limited services make it harder for people to settle. In contrast, the West Side's smaller counties contain tightly concentrated populations that support modern infrastructure and economic diversity. Eastern Oregon's size is impressive, but its emptiness is even more defining. From timber ports to tech corridors, this is how the West won the economy. Western Oregon's economy has evolved through several powerful phases, each of which strengthened the region's population advantage. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, logging, fishing, and milling dominated. Coastal ports and river systems allowed lumber and goods to move efficiently to global markets. As timber declined and Oregon modernized, Western cities transitioned into service-oriented economies. Technology companies, research institutions, higher education centers, and creative industries emerged across Portland, Corvallis, and Eugene. These sectors require large labor forces and thrive in dense urban environments, which further accelerated population growth in the West. Eastern Oregon followed a very different economic path centered on agriculture, ranching, and resource extraction. These industries require vast landscapes but employ relatively few people due to mechanization and the nature of the work. While the East generates substantial agricultural output, it does not generate dense populations. The West continually reinvented its economy, allowing it to grow, diversify, and attract new residents, while the East remained tied to land-based industries that do not support large cities. This economic divergence solidified Oregon's population imbalance and ensured the West would dominate growth. Transportation networks have always favored Western Oregon, reinforcing its population advantage. Early railroads followed the Willamette Valley because it offered flat terrain, abundant water, and a direct north-to-south route connecting Portland to major markets. These rail lines supported industry, trade, and urban growth. Eastern Oregon, with its rugged terrain, vast distances, and sparse settlements, could not attract the same level of rail investment. When interstate highways were built in the 20th century, the pattern continued. Interstate 5 became the state's primary transportation spine, linking Portland, Salem, Eugene, and Medford in a single connected corridor. In contrast, Interstate 84 cuts across eastern Oregon, but it passes vast stretches of empty land with only a few medium-sized towns along the way. The limited number of major routes through eastern Oregon makes it harder to attract large-scale industry or develop densely populated cities. Transportation infrastructure naturally follows areas where people already live, and since the West had the early population advantage, it became the focus of ongoing development. This created a long-term feedback loop where railroads and highways helped the West grow faster and left the East more isolated. Why eastern Oregon looks more like Idaho than Portland. A striking transformation occurs when you cross the Cascades. Western Oregon's dense forests, moss-covered landscapes, and urban corridors give way to sweeping plains, rolling wheat fields, and open rangelands. The cultural and visual identity of eastern Oregon more closely resembles Idaho, Nevada, and other interior West states than the coastal Pacific Northwest. Small farm towns replace major metropolitan centers, and the landscape becomes defined by distant horizons rather than dense vegetation. This difference comes from climate and geography. The rain shadow east of the Cascades creates a dry environment where trees are sparse and agriculture is built around large-scale dry land farming. Ranching operations spread across thousands of acres where cattle graze on open range. Community life reflects a slower pace, with local fairs, rodeos, and strong agricultural traditions shaping regional identity. Meanwhile, Portland and the Willamette Valley are defined by technology companies, universities, and suburban sprawl. The contrast is so sharp that Oregon almost feels like two different states placed side by side. Eastern Oregon's resemblance to the interior West highlights how dramatically climate shapes culture, economy, and population. Why most jobs, universities, and hospitals cluster in Western Oregon. The concentration of industry, education, and healthcare in Western Oregon is one of the strongest reasons the population remains heavily tilted toward the Willamette Valley. Major universities such as Oregon State University in Corvallis and the University of Oregon in Eugene attract tens of thousands of students, staff, and researchers each year. Portland hosts the region's largest medical facilities, corporate headquarters, and technology companies that provide high-paying jobs and long-term career paths. These institutions create powerful economic ecosystems that draw people from across the state and nation. Eastern Oregon has universities and hospitals, but on a much smaller scale. Without major research centers, corporate districts, or large healthcare hubs, it cannot generate the same economic momentum. Young residents often leave the East in search of higher education or employment opportunities in the West and rarely return. Jobs and services naturally cluster where people already live, and people move to areas where jobs and services are available. This feedback loop ensures that Western Oregon continues to grow while the East struggles to retain younger generations and maintain population stability. College towns made the West a population magnet. Universities are powerful engines of population growth, and Western Oregon has the majority of them. Portland State University, Oregon State University in Corvallis, and the University of Oregon in Eugene attract tens of thousands of students, faculty, and staff each year. Many of these individuals remain in the region after graduation, contributing to the workforce, starting families, and supporting local economies. Colleges also attract businesses, research institutions, and technology companies that rely on a steady supply of educated workers. This creates a self-reinforcing loop of growth. Eastern Oregon, with far fewer major campuses, does not benefit from this consistent influx of young residents. Eastern Oregon University in La Grande plays an important role regionally, but it cannot match the scale or influence of the Western institutions. As a result, young adults from eastern towns frequently move west to pursue higher education and rarely return home. This ongoing migration ensures that Western Oregon continues to grow while the East faces aging populations and slower economic development. Universities act as magnets, and Oregon's largest magnets are all in the West. Why Eastern Oregon's agriculture uses land, not people. Agriculture dominates Eastern Oregon, but the type of agriculture practiced there requires enormous tracts of land and relatively few workers. Wheat, alfalfa, potatoes, and other dryland crops thrive across the high desert plains, but modern technology allows a small number of people to manage thousands of acres. Ranching is similarly land-intensive rather than labor-intensive. Cattle operations may spread across entire counties, yet employ only a handful of workers. Mechanization means tractors, combines, irrigation pivots, and automated systems do much of the work that once required human labor. This makes Eastern Oregon a region of high production but low population density. In contrast, the industries that dominate Western Oregon, such as technology, retail, education, and healthcare, require massive numbers of employees working in close proximity. This difference explains why the West has large cities and the East does not. Eastern Oregon produces food and resources for the entire region, but that economic model never supported dense towns or sustained population growth. It is a landscape built for agriculture rather than urbanization, and its demographics reflect that reality. Why immigration boosts Western Oregon but barely touches the East? Immigration patterns strongly favor Western Oregon because newcomers from around the world tend to settle in areas with diverse populations, strong job markets, international airports, and established cultural communities. Cities such as Portland, Beaverton, Hillsborough, and Salem offer all of these advantages. Immigrants find language support networks, employment in technology and services, and educational opportunities for their families. These metropolitan environments make the West far more attractive for long-term settlement. Eastern Oregon, by contrast, has smaller communities and fewer economic opportunities outside of agriculture and small-scale manufacturing. While some agricultural towns in the East have immigrant populations connected to farm labor, the overall growth is modest and dispersed. Without large cities, universities, or major corporate hubs, Eastern Oregon does not draw the same number of newcomers. Immigration is one of the primary drivers of modern population growth in many regions, and because immigrants overwhelmingly choose Western Oregon, the demographic imbalance continues to widen. The West becomes more diverse and populous, while the East grows slowly or remains static. Public lands and wilderness keep Eastern Oregon wild and empty. A significant portion of Eastern Oregon is composed of federal lands, national forests, wildlife refuges, and officially protected wilderness areas. These lands preserve incredible natural beauty, but they also restrict the development of housing, suburbs, and industrial zones. Large areas of Harney, Lake, Grant, and Malheur counties are controlled by the Bureau of Land Management or the Forest Service. While these regions are ideal for recreation, conservation, and wildlife habitat, their designation prevents large-scale urban expansion. Even privately owned lands are often zoned for agriculture or conservation rather than residential use. The result is a landscape that remains wide open and sparsely populated. These protections help maintain Oregon's natural heritage, but they also ensure that Eastern Oregon cannot grow into a densely settled region. Western Oregon, with more private land, access to water, and existing cities, is far better suited for residential and commercial development. The balance between conservation and population growth leans heavily toward conservation in the East, which is why so much of the region remains wild and empty. When young people leave the high desert for the rainy side, young adults consistently leave Eastern Oregon to pursue higher education, career opportunities, and urban lifestyles in the West. This pattern has existed for generations, and it continues to shape demographic trends. Teenagers who graduate from high schools in eastern towns often enroll at universities in Eugene, Corvallis, or Portland. Once they arrive, they discover job markets, entertainment, social networks, and opportunities unavailable in their rural hometowns. After graduation, many choose to remain in Western Oregon, where wages are higher and career paths more diverse. Eastern communities lose a significant portion of their young population, and they struggle to replace them. This creates an aging demographic in the East and a more dynamic population in the West. The result is a long-term brain drain that reinforces the population imbalance. As the West grows younger and more economically active, the East faces challenges in maintaining schools, healthcare services, and local businesses. The movement of young people is subtle but incredibly powerful, shaping Oregon's demographic future one generation at a time. Portland, Salem, Eugene versus a whole empty half of the state. Western Oregon is defined by three powerful metropolitan anchors that shape the state's culture, economy, and political landscape. Portland is the largest and most influential city, serving as a major center for technology, trade, education, and the arts. Salem brings government workers, institutions, and public sector employment, while Eugene thrives as a university-driven hub with research facilities and a vibrant student population. These cities form a dense corridor of people and opportunity that extends through the Willamette Valley. Eastern Oregon, on the other hand, has no major metropolitan center to match them. Instead, it consists of widely spaced small towns such as Pendleton, Baker City, LeGrand, and Ontario. These towns serve as local hubs but cannot attract the population, investment, or infrastructure that large metros generate. The vast distances between communities also limit economic diversification and discourage the development of large industries. Without a major city to anchor growth, Eastern Oregon remains dependent on agriculture, ranching, and small-scale services rather than the diverse economies found in the West. As a result, one half of the state feels metropolitan and interconnected, while the other feels remote, rural, and sparsely settled. Climate, not politics, drew Oregon's population line. While political narratives sometimes attempt to explain Oregon's population divide, the true cause is physical geography. Climate, terrain, and natural resources determined where people could settle long before modern political divisions existed. Western Oregon receives abundant rainfall, creating fertile farmland, dense forests, and gentle landscapes that support agriculture, transportation, and cities. The Willamette Valley became a natural magnet for settlement because it offered ideal conditions for growing food, building towns, and transporting goods. By contrast, Eastern Oregon sits in a rain shadow where moisture is limited, temperatures swing dramatically, and large areas consist of rugged desert or rangeland. These environmental factors restrict farming, make water scarcer, and raise the cost of infrastructure. Cities tend to grow in places where nature makes life easier, and in Oregon, those places lie west of the Cascades. The population distribution is not the result of cultural differences or political decisions, but a logical consequence of climate, geography, and the availability of water. Nature drew Oregon's population line long before people arrived. One state, two different countries on the same map. Oregon is a single state, but its two halves often feel like completely different countries placed next to each other. Western Oregon is dense, rainy, urban, and plugged into global trade through ports, universities, and technology industries. Cities stretch across the Willamette Valley with suburbs, highways, and economic corridors that connect millions of people. Eastern Oregon, in contrast, is dry, rural, and defined by wide-open landscapes of sagebrush, mountains, and rangeland. Life moves at a different pace, shaped by agriculture, ranching, and small towns rather than metropolitan density. The physical environment sets the tone. The West is green and maritime. The East is arid and continental. These differences influence everything from architecture and culture to job markets and transportation. Together, they create a fascinating divide where two distinct worlds coexist inside the same borders. Oregon's story is the story of geography shaping identity. It is a place where one side holds most of the people and infrastructure, while the other preserves vast stretches of untouched land that feel almost timeless.